Hello guys, this is Panzermeister36. In today's video, we're going to be looking at making this winter field applied camouflage pattern on our Soviet T-34-122 here. As you can see, it's not the prettiest camouflage ever. That's the point. We're simulating a camouflage that's been applied by basically the Soviet tank crew using rags and brushes, not something that's been sprayed on very nicely. The key here is making it look like it's messy, but in scale messy. You don't want your models to just look like you can't paint. You want to make it look like the Soviet tank crew has not really cared about the precision of their camouflage pattern. They just really want some white on their tank. This video is part of my ongoing buddy build with Scott from Small Soldier. So after you're done here, you should go check out his channel and see his Egyptian T-34-122. He's also weathering up using similar techniques to what I'm doing here. For example, chipping fluid. So anyways, let's get started on our winter camouflage. In the last video, last week, I showed the application of this nice three-tone Soviet camouflage. After that was all applied in the video, I then sprayed on a coat, or I guess two coats, of AK heavy chipping fluid. You simply put this in your airbrush with no thinner and apply two thin coats. I showed that in last week's video, like you can see here. You just spray it on, and then once your model is a little bit shiny, you know that you have good coverage. So like I said, I've applied another coat over the model as it is now. And then now we're going to look at applying some winter camouflage. I'm going to use AK Real Color Flat White, which is just basic white paint. And I'm going to be thinning it with X20A thinner from Tamiya, which is the white cap thinner. I am not going to be using lacquer thinner. Usually I do use lacquer thinner when I'm thinning my paints for airbrushing, but I don't do it when I'm chipping, using chipping fluid, because it makes the paint too durable. X20A is better for that. So I've thinned the AK Real Color Flat White about 80% with the X20A thinner, and now I'm beginning to apply it in kind of like a squiggly, marbly coat. You can see I'm not doing overall coverage, but I'm just kind of randomly squiggling it on where I'd like it. This is to simulate the brush motions and rag motions of the crew as they're applying it. Also, I want to point out that you can notice that I'm only really applying the white over areas of green, and I'm leaving the brown and the tan exposed. I'm replicating a camouflage pattern that was kind of an order, but never really occurred because the Russians were just mostly sending their tanks out in green. But the white's only supposed to be applied over the green areas. So you can see them applying some squiggly coats, and in some areas I'm also doing some vertical streaks, like right here. That's to kind of prepare for the streaking that we're going to be applying later with some brush applied effects. But I can initially kind of lay those out now to give me better coverage. This doesn't need to be that precise because we're going to chip some of it off, and then like I said, we're going to be applying some more paint over this with a paintbrush later. But this just helps us kind of plan out what we're going to do and helps give us some decent coverage so we don't have to go crazy with the white paint that we brush apply later. So here's the result on our model. You can see that we have, basically all the green areas are covered with some squigglies, and also there's some streaking areas as well where the paint would run down. Doesn't look that bad, but we got to work on this a little bit more obviously, because right now it looks like it's been sprayed on with an airbrush. We don't want that. First of all, to activate the chipping fluid that I applied before the white, I'm simply going to take some water and a small brush. The brush I love for this is called a 1/8 inch angular shader. I get it very slightly damp, wipe off most of the water, and then I begin to gently rub at the areas of my model where I'd like some chipping effects. So for example, on the sides here, the crew is probably going to be walking up and down to get into the turret. So I'm chipping this area pretty heavily. Now it's actually really easy to get the chipping effects. You don't have to rub as hard as you think because the chipping fluid is naturally weak to the water that you have on your brush. So it will dissolve and reveal the underlying paint because it removes the paint that's on top, which is the white. So I'm simply rubbing, and it kind of naturally forms the chipping effects. That's the whole point of this product. Another area that we'll see a lot of chipping is where the driver gets into his hatch here. He's kind of sliding up and down there all the time, so I'm really chipping up this area. The crew might also kind of slide down this area if they're getting off the turret. I know, for example, that on the Hetzer, people always slide up and down the front because it's a nice angled surface. So I imagine it's probably the same on the T-34. So I'm going to wear this area down as well a little bit. The top of the turret is also another area where there's a lot of wear and tear because the crew's going to be walking around here to get into the hatches. So I'm, again, simply just rubbing gently with my paintbrush with a little bit of water, and it naturally forms shipping effects because that's the shipping fluid working for you. It's a lot easier than it looks, honestly. So with some chipping effects applied, here's our model. As I've been describing, I'm keeping the chipping effects in areas where they make sense. So for example, edges on the engine deck where there's lots of wear and tear, the angled sides here where the crew is going to be walking up and down to get on the engine deck and turret. But note how you can still see the squigglies in some areas. I want those to be visible because that's kind of our crappy field applied camouflage brushstroke stuff. So you don't want to erase that. And also look, sides of the turret are very clean because nobody really walks there. But I showed you earlier the top was heavily worn. Now for what is the most important step. I'm going to be using this AK-751 washable white paint product. This is ideal for these effects because it works basically exactly like the distempered paint that these guys would use in real life to camouflage their paint. It's susceptible to water, so you can kind of wipe it around after it's set in place for, a minute or so. And you really just kind of layer it on exactly how you would if you were crappily applying winter camouflage to a tank. It's really, really cool, and it's designed for this effect, so it's, it makes it really, really easy. I have already shown this product in a couple of videos before on my channel because it's really, really useful for this kind of stuff, but I'm going to explain my process again here. Basically, there's like 3 things I'm doing with this. I'm defining the edges more and making it look more brush applied by working over the areas that I've airbrushed. And the other thing I'm doing is I'm adding some streaking effects. And the last thing is I'm what we call mapping in some heavier areas where I want it to look more built up. So we're going to look at those areas in a little more depth later, but as you can see right here, just painting some basic streaks. Over here we're defining the edges more because the airbrushed effect looks sprayed on. This effect in real life was not sprayed on. It was applied, like I've been saying, with rags or paintbrushes and stuff like that. So it's really not smooth at the edges. You can see I'm going over my paintwork a couple of times to build up the illusion of multiple kind of messy passes where they're just slapping on some paint and they don't really care how beautiful it looks. They just want some solid coverage. So you can see that I'm kind of getting some brush strokes, and in some areas over here I'm simulating where the paint's been basically streaked down just because they applied it really heavily, so it runs down from the upper areas. Because this AK-751 washable white paint product is susceptible to water, you can naturally get basic streaking effects by just applying it like that, then taking a wet brush and just rubbing over it. As you can see here, that wipes away most of it and it kind of reactivates and streaks it down. Take a little more white afterwards to just kind of add some more layers to the streaks and more kind of precise, tight streaks. Another benefit to this paint being susceptible to water is that you can rub it at any edges where you want the base color to show through to simulate some wear and tear. So this exposed casting seam here, simply rub over it and the white comes off. Here I'm going to show some mapping. This is just to build up more white essentially on areas where it's not going to get really worn away. So for example, the area kind of around the back of that hatch, when the hatch is open, that kind of blocks it off so nobody walks there. And this weld seam here is nice and deep, so it's not really getting worn because it's kind of sunken below the finish. On the front of the hull here, I'm doing kind of all the effects together. So I'm doing some streaking here by applying the same product, just kind of layering it on, and I just rub over it with some, just some streaking motions. I can use a little bit of water if I need to, but usually this stuff just kind of flows naturally on its own. Here I'm going to do a little bit of more coverage and defining the edges to this sprayed area because I want to look more brush applied. And then again, I can wear it down to simulate the wear and tear from the guy getting in the hatch above there, the driver. If you don't even have an airbrush, you can probably get almost this entire effect just with this product, because the point of the airbrushing previously was to get some chipping in some areas. For example, look on the other side of the bow machine gun. You can see some chipping there. And also here you can see some nice chipping effects. And it also builds up a lot of white. But you can just build up all that white with more layers of this product. And you can also get chipping effects by rubbing over this product with some water as well. It would take extra time, but you can really probably do almost this entire effect without an airbrush. You can see here I'm adding a couple little drips from the turret. I decided to add this to make it look a little more interesting. Here's the result of the field applied camouflage pattern on our T-34. I think this looks awesome. It's exactly what I was going for. By carefully applying a bunch of layers of the washable white paint with a paintbrush, you can see I've kind of built up layers and almost looks like brush strokes. That's exactly what I'm going for. You can also see how I didn't completely cover all the hairspray chipped areas. So right here you can see there's still some chipping showing through. You can also see my nice streaking effects. Very easy with this product because it streaks nicely by just brushing it with some water. And of course in a couple of areas you can still see the effect of my previous squigglies with the airbrush, like right here on the fuel tank. The turret front is another great example of the combination of hairspray chips and the mapping with the washable white paint. Recall earlier when I was talking about the turret, the top is very, very worn because the crew walks around here a lot. However, the hatches are not worn because the hatches would be open when the crew is walking on top of the turret. The sides of the turret are very clean because there's no wear and tear here. The crew doesn't walk on the sides. However, the angled sides of the hull, that's an actual surface that you can walk on, so that area has much more chipping than the sides of the turret. And similarly, the engine deck would also see a lot of wear and tear because the crew is going to be constantly servicing the engine on their tank. So there we go, that's our field applied winter camouflage pattern. Next up, I want to apply some markings. Now you might be shocked and terrified to see me painting with Tamiya paints by brush. Don't actually do this, it's just the only red paint I had. I'm brush painting here with some Tamiya XF7 flat red, because it's the only red paint I had. Now, Tamiya paints are notoriously bad for brush painting because they dry really, really fast. However, as we can see here, it can be done. It just takes a long time. You have to be really, really careful and you have to constantly clean your brush. I'm using red here because typically Soviet tank markings were applied with white when they were painted over the green, as you can already see kind of behind the whitewash. However, over whitewash, they were supposed to be applied with red. And I thought it'd be pretty interesting to have kind of like a reapplied marking effect, because the 64 that's applied in white is almost invisible because it's already painted over with the winter camouflage. So then I went over with my red here and applied the 64 again in a slightly different style just to make it look a little interesting. And yeah, it was a pain in the butt to paint these with Tamiya red, but it worked out. And you can see I'm also putting a couple little kind of like streaks here to simulate the brush applied effect. And also just use my toothpick here, or a shish kebab stick, whatever it is, a skewer to make a little bit of kind of scraping, mainly on areas where the white has been worn away. I also made the red worn away there as well because it's applied over top of the white. And there we go. Some nice looking red Soviet tank markings. I think that looks awesome. I was scared about painting over my white with the red, but it actually came out looking really awesome, so no regrets. I did consider applying a filter now, and I bought this filter specifically for the tank. However, I was worried that it was going to turn my winter white into kind of like a winter yellow, so I decided not to go with that. Instead, we're going to filter more carefully with some oil paints later on. But as for right now, that's going to be it for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you learned something new and have been inspired by my work here to maybe try winter camouflage pattern. It is very, very easy. It does take some time if you're doing it my way with the washable white paint. I probably spent about 3 different evenings building up multiple layers of that stuff, but the result, as you can see here, looks awesome. There's really no other way you can get that kind of layered on, chipped, worn, multi-layer brushstroke kind of effect. So take some time, but the results are worth it in the end. I'm very, very pleased with this. As always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them on below. I always read through them all and try to answer as many as I can. I do enjoy helping people with my passion of weathering, so don't be shy. Also, next week I will not be doing another video on this series because I need to find some oil paints for this. So I'm going to be doing something else instead. But until then, I hope you get some good modeling time in with the coronavirus locking us all down. Stay safe out there and build a model. Also, huge thanks to my Patreon supporters. Those guys really help me buying the paints and products that you guys see in these videos all the time. Like I said, I'll see you next week. Goodbye, happy modeling, and stay safe.